On the edge of a small coastal town where the sea whispered secrets to the rocks and the wind danced through the trees, an old man named Henry walked alone. He was once one of the richest men in the area, known for owning half the businesses along the harbor. People saw him as a legend, a man who had built his fortune from nothing and never looked back. But now he lived quietly in a large house at the end of a winding road, with only his memories and a few loyal staff to keep him company. His white suit and golden cane made him easy to spot, and every evening he took the same walk across the old wooden bridge that overlooked a deep ravine. Not far from the bridge, in a small rented room above a laundromat, Kyle sat on a worn-out chair staring at the ceiling. Once a hard-working mechanic with dreams of opening his own garage, life had not been kind to him. A failed business deal, a bitter divorce, and mounting debts had left him broken and desperate. He used to believe that if you worked hard enough, things would get better, but after years of struggle he no longer believed in luck or fairness. All he knew was that he was tired, broke, and angry. One night, while drinking alone in a quiet bar, Kyle overheard two men talking about Henry. They said the old man kept millions in cash inside a safe in his home. Some even claimed he didn't trust banks and preferred to keep his money close. The words hit Kyle like a punch to the gut. He thought about how much his life could change if he had just a fraction of that wealth. He imagined paying off his debts, buying a new place, maybe even starting over somewhere else. The idea took root in his mind and grew quickly into something dangerous. Over the next few days, Kyle couldn't stop thinking about it. He started watching Henry's routine from a distance, noting when he left his house, which path he took, and how often he was alone. He told himself that this wasn't about hurting anyone. It was just about taking what he needed to survive. He convinced himself that Henry wouldn't miss the money, that he probably wouldn't even notice it was gone. But deep down, Kyle knew he was lying to himself. The plan formed slowly, piece by piece. He would wait until late at night, when the house was empty except for the old man and maybe a servant or two. He would break in quietly, find the safe, take the money, and disappear before sunrise. It seemed simple enough, but as the night approached, doubt crept into his thoughts. What if someone woke up? What if he got caught? What if Henry fought back? Still, desperation drove him forward. On the chosen night, Kyle dressed in dark clothes and slipped out of his room. The town was quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional car passing by. He walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, heart pounding with every step. When he reached the gates of Henry's mansion, he hesitated. For a moment, he considered turning back. But then he remembered his empty wallet, his broken future, and the cold loneliness waiting for him at home. He swallowed hard and climbed over the fence. Inside the mansion, Kyle moved carefully, avoiding creaky floorboards and listening for any sign of movement. He searched the downstairs rooms first, checking drawers and cabinets, hoping to find something valuable. But there was nothing, no stacks of cash, no open safe, no signs of hidden wealth. Frustration built inside him. He should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Then he heard a voice. "Can I help you?" Kyle spun around to see Henry standing in the doorway, calm and composed, sipping tea from a porcelain cup. There was no fear in his eyes, only quiet disappointment. Kyle's heart dropped. He hadn't expected this. He had imagined breaking in unnoticed, grabbing the money and leaving without a sound. Now standing face to face with the man he had come to rob, he felt exposed and trapped. "I'm sorry," Kyle stammered, reaching for the knife in his pocket. "I just need some money." Henry sighed and placed his cup on a nearby table. "You think this is the way?" he asked gently. "You think stealing will fix your problems?" Kyle didn't answer. His hands trembled as he stepped closer, unsure whether to run or fight. Henry remained still, watching him like a teacher, watching a troubled student. "You don't understand," Kyle muttered. "I've lost everything." Henry shook his head. "You still have time to make things right." Something snapped inside Kyle. Maybe it was frustration, maybe guilt, maybe the weight of everything he had lost. Before he could think, he lunged forward and grabbed Henry by the collar. The older man stumbled back, shocked but still calm. They struggled for a moment, neither saying a word. Then, with a final push, Kyle threw Henry toward the door. They ended up outside, near the edge of the bridge. The moonlight cast long shadows over the water below. Henry tried to steady himself, but Kyle was too strong, too angry. With one last shove, Kyle pushed the old man over the railing. Time slowed. Henry screamed once, a sharp cry that echoed through the night, then disappeared into the darkness below. Silence followed. Kyle stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Henry had been. His breath came fast and shallow. He hadn't meant to do that. He hadn't wanted to hurt anyone, but it was too late. Unseen behind a bush near the bridge, a little boy named Leo watched everything unfold. Only 8 years old, he had wandered away from his family picnic earlier that evening, chasing fireflies, into the woods. He hadn't meant to be there, he hadn't meant to see anything, but now he stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, unable to move. He saw Kyle throw Henry over the railing. He heard the scream. He saw Kyle look around nervously, before running away into the night. Leo didn't know what to do. He was too scared to call out, too confused to run for help. So he did the only thing he could. He stayed silent, watching the spot where the old man had fallen, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees, leaving behind only the sound of the wind and the distant crash of waves below the bridge. Back at home, Kyle locked his door and collapsed onto his bed. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. He told himself it had been an accident, that Henry had fallen, that he hadn't meant to kill him. But the image of the old man falling kept replaying in his mind, again and again. Meanwhile, Leo returned to his family, pretending nothing had happened. He didn't tell his parents where he had gone or what he had seen, but that night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man throw the old man off the bridge, and he wondered if he would ever be able to forget it. The morning after the fall, the town woke up to a sky painted with soft pink and gold. Birds chirped in the trees, and the sea rolled gently against the shore like nothing had changed. But for Kyle, the world felt different. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, his hands still trembling from the night before. The events replayed in his mind over and over. Henry's calm face, the struggle, the push, the scream that vanished into the dark. Kyle kept telling himself it wasn't murder. It was an accident. Henry had slipped. That's what he would say if anyone asked. Down by the bridge, fishermen arrived early as usual. One of them noticed something strange near the rocks below. At first he thought it was a piece of old furniture caught in the current, but as he got closer, his stomach dropped. It was a man, motionless, face down in the shallow water. The golden tip of a cane stuck out from under his body. The fisherman ran back to his boat and called the police. By mid-morning, news spread through town. An elderly man had fallen off the bridge during his evening walk. The police said it looked like an accident. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints except the old man's own. They didn't suspect foul play. Henry's family arrived quickly, dressed in black and speaking in quiet voices. Reporters gathered outside the mansion, asking questions nobody wanted to answer. The town mourned, but life moved on. Kyle watched the news from his small room above, the laundromat. He stayed quiet, avoided eye contact when he went out for food, and tried not to draw attention. He told himself he was safe. Nobody saw anything. Nobody knew. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching him. Meanwhile, Leo sat at the breakfast table, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. His mother smiled at him and asked how he slept. He nodded slowly, but didn't speak. Since last night, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about what he saw. He remembered the man's face, the way he pushed the old man off the bridge without hesitation. He remembered the scream, and most of all, he remembered the silence that followed. At school, Leo became quieter than usual. His teacher noticed he wasn't paying attention during lessons. He stared out the window instead of doing his work. During art class, he drew the same thing over and over. A tall man standing on a bridge pushing another man into darkness. His drawings were simple, made with crayons and shaky lines, but they showed exactly what he had seen. One of the teachers found the drawings and frowned. "Leo?" she said gently. "Why are you drawing this?" Leo looked away and mumbled, "Just something I saw." "Where did you see this?" she asked. He didn't answer. That night, Leo's mother tucked him into bed. She kissed his forehead and whispered good night. But once the door was closed, Leo sat up and pulled his blanket close. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man again, standing on the bridge, throwing the old man into the dark water. He wondered who the man was. He wondered why he did it. And most of all, he wondered if he should tell someone. Back in his rented room, Kyle tried to go back to normal. He started looking for job ads online, pretending everything was fine. He even visited a mechanic shop on the other side of town, hoping to get hired. The owner gave him a chance, handing him a wrench and pointing to a broken car. Kyle worked hard, wiped sweat from his brow, and tried to act like any other worker trying to make a living. But at night, the guilt crept in. He dreamed about Henry's face, about the scream, about falling into the water himself. He woke up sweating, heart pounding. He started drinking again, just enough to forget, just enough to sleep. Weeks passed. The town slowly forgot about Henry. His house remained empty, guarded by a few staff until the family decided what to do with it. The police closed the case as accidental death. Life returned to normal for everyone except Kyle and Leo. Leo began drawing more. He filled notebooks with images of the bridge, the man, the fall. His mother grew worried. She asked him what was wrong, but he only shrugged. One day, she found one of the drawings and held it tightly in her hand. She looked at Leo with concern. "Did something happen, sweetheart?" she asked. Leo looked at her, then at the drawing. For a moment, he almost spoke, but then he shook his head and walked away. At the mechanic shop, Kyle tried to focus on work, but his mind wandered. He kept checking his phone, expecting bad news. He kept seeing people staring at him, wondering if they knew. He started locking his doors at night, jumping at every sound. He told himself he was being paranoid, but the fear wouldn't leave. Then one rainy afternoon, Leo finally spoke. He sat in the classroom while his teacher helped another student. Quietly, he leaned forward and whispered, "I saw something." The teacher turned to him. "What did you see, Leo?" Leo hesitated, then said, "A man threw another man off a bridge." The teacher blinked. "When did you see this?" Leo looked down. "A few weeks ago." The teacher exchanged a look with another staff member. "Are you sure?" Leo nodded. "Yes." The teacher took the drawing from his desk and studied it. Then she stood up and said, "Come with me." Leo followed her down the hallway to the principal's office. The principal listened carefully as the teacher explained what Leo had said. He asked Leo a few questions, and though the boy was nervous, he answered truthfully. When the meeting ended, the principal picked up the phone and called the police. Back at home, Kyle sat on his bed, flipping through channels on the small TV. He heard a knock on the door and froze. Slowly, he stood up and opened it. 2 officers stood outside. "Mr. Kyle Martin?" one of them asked. Kyle swallowed. "Yes?" "We need to ask you a few questions." His heart pounded. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The officers led him to their car, explaining that they were investigating a recent case. Kyle tried to stay calm. He told himself this was nothing. But as they drove away, he looked out the window and realized something had changed. The town was still peaceful. The sea still whispered to the rocks. But for Kyle, the silence was gone. And for Leo, the truth had finally begun to surface. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. The town remained peaceful on the surface, but beneath it, something had shifted. Whispers spread through the streets like wind through dry leaves. People talked about Leo's story, about how a little boy had seen everything that night on the bridge. Some dismissed it as imagination, the way children sometimes saw things that weren't really there. but others weren't so sure. At school, Leo found himself surrounded by unfamiliar faces. A woman from child services sat with him in a small room, asking gentle questions while taking notes in a black notebook. She asked him to describe the man again, the clothes he was wearing, what he looked like, where exactly it happened. Leo answered as best as he could, his voice soft but steady. He didn't know it yet, but his words were becoming part of something much bigger than he understood. Back at the police station, detectives pored over every detail. They reviewed old security footage from nearby roads, looking for any sign of Kyle on the night Henry died. They checked Kyle's background, finding records of financial trouble, past arguments, and an old fight at a bar years ago. Nothing serious enough on its own, but together, they painted a picture that raised more questions than answers. Kyle, meanwhile, sat in a cold interrogation room under bright lights, hands folded tightly on the table. Across from him, two detectives watched him carefully, waiting for him to speak. One of them tapped a folder on the table, flipping through pages of notes and photos. "We've been talking to people," one said. A little boy came forward. "He says he saw you push Henry off the bridge." Kyle shook his head immediately. "That's not true," he said. "I wasn't even near that bridge that night." "Then can you explain why your car was parked just down the road?" the other detective asked, sliding a grainy photo across the table. It showed a dark vehicle parked near the trees, barely visible in the night. Kyle stared at the image, his throat dry. "Maybe I drove by," he muttered. "Doesn't mean anything." "What were you doing out there?" the first detective asked. I don't remember," Kyle admitted. His voice wavered slightly, betraying the calm he tried to show. The detectives exchanged a look. One of them leaned back in his chair. "You know, we're trying to find the truth here. If you had something to do with this, now would be the time to come clean." Kyle swallowed hard. "I didn't kill him," he said quickly. "If he fell, it was an accident, I swear." But deep down he knew the story was unraveling. He had hoped the silence would protect him, that no one would ever find out what really happened. Now, with a child's testimony and blurry camera footage, the walls he built around his secret were starting to crack. Outside the station, news crews gathered, cameras flashing as reporters stood ready to deliver updates. When Kyle was let out in handcuffs, the crowd surged forward, shouting questions. "Did you kill Henry? Why did you do it? Was it about money?" Kyle kept his head down, ignoring the noise, hoping it would all go away if he stayed silent long enough. He was taken to a holding cell where the air smelled stale and the walls were cold. He sat alone on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He had only wanted to take what he thought he needed to survive. But now, survival felt like the least of his worries. At home, Leo struggled to understand what was happening. His mother held him close, whispering reassurances, telling him he had done the right thing. But Leo didn't feel brave. He felt scared. He had never told anyone about what he saw before, and now that he had, everything felt different. At school, some kids avoided him while others whispered behind his back. Teachers gave him extra attention, checking in on him between classes. He just wanted things to go back to normal. Henry's family arrived in town to hear the new developments. They met with investigators, listened to Leo's account, and viewed the evidence. They had accepted his death as an accident before, but now doubt crept into their minds. One of Henry's nephews, a tall man with sharp eyes, stood outside the mansion looking toward the bridge. He clenched his jaw, fists tightening at his sides. He wanted justice not just for Henry, but for the life that had been stolen from him in the dark. Weeks passed, and the investigation continued. More witnesses were questioned, more details emerged. The prosecution began building a case against Kyle, using Leo's testimony as the foundation. The defense argued that a child's memory could be unreliable, that trauma could distort facts, that the real cause of Henry's fall might still be unknown. But the judge agreed that there was enough evidence to proceed. As the trial date approached, Kyle sat in his cell, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had lost everything: his freedom, his dignity, his chance at a second life. He no longer dreamed of opening a garage or paying off his debts. Now he only dreamed of waking up and realizing this was all just a nightmare. Leo, too, changed in those weeks. He spoke more openly about what he saw, though it still frightened him. He started sleeping better, though he still woke up some nights gasping for breath. His teacher noticed he was more focused in class, less distracted by thoughts of the bridge and the man who pushed someone into darkness. One evening, Leo sat with his mother on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He turned to her and asked, "What happens to bad people?" She looked at him carefully. "Sometimes they get caught," she said gently, "and then they have to face what they did." Leo nodded slowly. "Will he go to jail?" "If he did something wrong," she said, "then yes, he will." Leo looked out at the sea, thinking about the man in the courtroom, the one who had thrown another man off the bridge. He didn't hate Kyle, he didn't even really understand why he did it, but he knew one thing. He had told the truth, and because of that, the world was trying to make things right again. As the trial drew closer, the town braced itself for what was coming. For Kyle, it meant facing the consequences of his actions. For Leo, it meant standing up and speaking the truth once more. And for everyone else, it meant remembering that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, the smallest voices can bring light to the truth. The courtroom was quiet, but the silence felt heavy like the air before a storm. People filled the wooden benches watching as Kyle sat at the defense table, his hands folded tightly in front of him. His lawyer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a well-worn suit, flipped through papers without really reading them. Across the room, Henry's family sat together, their faces unreadable. They had lost a loved one once, thinking it was an accident. Now they were here to find out if it had been something far worse. Leo sat beside his mother near the back of the room, clutching a small notebook in his lap. He didn't understand everything about trials or laws, but he knew what he saw. The judge entered, everyone stood, and the case officially began. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman with a calm voice, started by laying out the facts. She spoke about Henry's final evening walk, how he had been seen on security footage, heading toward the bridge alone. Then she brought up Leo's testimony, the only witness to the event. As Leo was called to the stand, a hush fell over the room. He walked forward slowly, his small feet barely making a sound on the polished floor. He sat down, looked at the judge, and promised to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked him gently, "Leo, do you remember what happened that night?" Leo nodded. "Yes." "Can you tell us what you saw?" Leo swallowed hard and looked around the room. He saw Kyle sitting at the table staring at him with wide eyes. He remembered that face from the bridge, the way the man had looked so angry, so scared. Taking a deep breath, Leo said, "I saw a man push another man off the bridge." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. The prosecutor continued, asking for details, what the man was wearing, what he looked like, where exactly it happened. Leo answered each question as best he could, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. When the defense lawyer stood, he approached Leo calmly. "Leo," he said, "you're a very brave boy. But sometimes when we see things in the dark, they can look different than they really are. Are you sure it was this man who pushed Mr. Henry?" Leo looked at Kyle again. He hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Yes, I'm sure." The lawyer sighed and turned to the jury. "We must consider the reliability of a child's memory," he said, "especially under such traumatic circumstances." But the damage was done. The jury had heard Leo's story, and even if doubts remained, the foundation of the prosecution's case had been set. Over the next few days, more evidence was presented. Security footage showed Kyle's car parked near the bridge that night. Witnesses described his strange behavior in the weeks after the fall, his sudden withdrawal, his nervousness, the way he avoided people. A forensic expert explained that, while there were no fingerprints on the bridge railing, the positioning of Henry's body suggested he had not fallen accidentally, but had been pushed with force. Kyle's lawyer tried to argue that there was no direct proof, no witnesses other than Leo, no confession. But the weight of the evidence, combined with Leo's clear account, painted a picture that was hard to ignore. One afternoon, Kyle was called to testify in his own defense. He took the stand, adjusting his tie nervously. The prosecutor asked him directly, "Mr. Martin, were you on the bridge the night Henry died?" Kyle looked at the jury, then at Leo, then at the judge. He swallowed hard. "I don't remember being there," he said carefully. "But your car was found nearby." The prosecutor pressed. "And multiple witnesses place you in that area that night. Do you deny being there?" "I might have driven by," Kyle admitted, "but I didn't kill him." "Then how do you explain what Leo saw?" the prosecutor asked. Kyle shifted in his seat. "Maybe he misunderstood," he said. "Maybe he saw someone else." The prosecutor stepped closer. "You expect this court to believe that a little boy imagined seeing you throw a man off a bridge?" "No," Kyle muttered. I don't know what happened." The courtroom grew quiet again. The jury watched him closely, trying to read his expression. Was he lying? Or was he just too afraid to admit the truth? After several more days of arguments, testimonies, and deliberations, the time came for the jury to make their decision. The judge called them forward, and the room held its breath. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a serious face, stood up and handed a sealed envelope to the clerk. The judge opened it, read the verdict, and looked up. "In the matter of the death of Henry Caldwell," he said, "this court finds the defendant, Kyle Martin, guilty of murder in the second degree." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some people looked relieved, others stunned. Kyle's face went pale. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Kyle didn't seem to hear. He was led away in handcuffs, his fate now sealed. Outside, the town buzzed with news of the verdict. Some people thought he deserved more time, others believed he should have gotten less. But for Henry's family, justice had finally arrived. Leo sat quietly in his classroom the next day, drawing in his notebook. His teacher watched him for a moment before speaking softly. "How are you feeling today?" Leo looked up. He thought about it for a long time before answering. "I feel okay," he said. His teacher smiled. "That was very brave, what you did." Leo wasn't sure if he felt brave, but he knew he had told the truth. And because of that, the world had listened. Back in prison, Kyle sat alone in his cell, staring at the cold walls around him. He had spent years running from his problems, hoping money would fix everything. Now, he had nothing. No freedom, no future. Just the weight of his actions pressing down on him every time he closed his eyes. As the days passed, life in the town slowly returned to normal. The bridge still stood, the sea still whispered against the rocks, and children still played in the parks. But for those who had lived through the trial, things had changed. For Kyle, it was a reminder that choices have consequences. For Leo, it was a lesson in courage. And for the town, it was proof that even the smallest voices can bring the biggest truths into the light. Life in the town moved forward, but the trial left a mark on everyone who had watched it unfold. The quiet streets no longer felt as peaceful as they once did. People whispered about Kyle's sentence, some saying it was too light, others believing it was just right. Henry's mansion remained closed, its windows dark, its gates locked tight. No one lived there anymore, and few dared to walk near it. It stood like a ghost of the past, a reminder of what had been lost. Leo returned to school like any other boy his age, but things were not quite the same for him. Some kids avoided him, unsure how to act around someone who had seen something so terrible. Others looked at him with quiet respect, though they never said anything. His teachers gave him extra attention, checking in on him during breaks, asking if he wanted to talk about how he was feeling. He always nodded and said he was fine even when he wasn't sure if that was true. At night, he still dreamed about the bridge. He saw the man standing there, saw the old man fall, heard the scream echo through the trees. But now, he also saw himself walking away from the courtroom, his mother holding his hand, telling him he had done the right thing. He didn't hate Kyle. He didn't understand why someone would do such a thing. But he knew that telling the truth had mattered, even if it scared him. Back in prison, Kyle sat alone in his cell, staring at the cracked walls and listening to the distant sounds of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Time moved slowly behind bars. Days blended together, marked only by the clang of metal doors and the occasional shout from another inmate. He had lost everything: his freedom, his dignity, the chance to start over. Now all he had was time to think about what he had done. He thought about Henry often, replaying their final moments together in his mind. He remembered the old man's calm face, the way he had spoken like he understood Kyle's pain. He had tried to justify his actions at first, telling himself that Henry had it coming, that he had pushed too hard, that it was an accident. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with it. The other inmates kept their distance from Kyle. Word had spread quickly about why he was there. Some saw him as dangerous, others as weak. He spent most of his time alone, either in his cell or in the small yard where prisoners walked in circles under the watchful eyes of guards. He rarely spoke, barely ate, and slept only when exhaustion forced him to close his eyes. Outside, Henry's family began the process of settling his estate. His will had been clear, dividing his wealth among relatives and charities. There were no surprises, no fights over money. One of his nephews took charge of the mansion, deciding whether to sell it or keep it in the family. As they went through his belongings, they found letters, photographs, and journals filled with memories of a life well lived. They read about his early struggles, his business triumphs, and the quiet peace he had found in his final years. He had written about kindness, about second chances, about the importance of doing the right thing, even when it was hard. One evening, Leo sat on the porch with his mother, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She had been careful not to push him into talking, but she could see the thoughts swirling behind his eyes. Finally, she asked gently, "Are you okay?" Leo looked at her and nodded slowly. "I guess." She sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "You can talk to me whenever you want." Leo hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he'll ever get out?" She knew who he meant. "Not for a very long time," she answered honestly. "And even if he does, he'll have to live with what he did." Leo frowned. "But he didn't mean to kill him." His mother sighed. "Sometimes people do things without meaning to, but that doesn't change what happened." Leo looked down at his hands. "I just wish I hadn't seen it." "I know," his mother said softly, "but you did the right thing by telling the truth." Leo didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he believed her yet. Meanwhile, Kyle sat in his cell reading a letter from his daughter. It had taken weeks for her to write back after he sent the first one. Her words were short, polite, but distant. She told him about school, about friends, about small things that once filled their conversations. She didn't ask when he would come home. She didn't say she missed him. The silence between the lines hurt more than the prison walls. He folded the letter carefully and placed it beneath his thin mattress. He thought about calling her, writing again, trying to explain. But what could he say? That he had made a mistake? That he wished things were different? That he had let anger and desperation lead him to do something unforgivable? There was no undoing it. As the seasons changed, the town slowly forgot about Kyle. Life continued as it always had. Fishermen cast their nets into the sea, children played in the parks, and tourists arrived in the summer months, unaware of the story hidden beneath the surface of the quiet town. But for Leo, the memory remained. For Kyle, the regret never faded. And for Henry's family, the loss lingered like the tide, ebbing and flowing with time but never fully disappearing. The world had moved on, but for those touched by the events of that night on the bridge, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Years passed like waves washing over the shore, steady and unstoppable. The town remained as it always had, with its quiet streets, old wooden bridge and sea breeze that carried stories through the trees. Life moved forward for everyone, even for those who still carried the weight of what had happened. Leo grew older. He was no longer the quiet boy who drew dark pictures in class. Now a teenager, he played soccer after school, laughed with friends, and dreamed about becoming a writer. One day, his teachers noticed how observant he was, how he paid attention to small details, how he often saw things others missed. He never forgot what he saw on that night by the bridge, but it no longer kept him awake at night. He had learned that telling the truth wasn't always easy, but it was always important. His mother watched him grow with pride, knowing that her son had faced something most adults would struggle to understand. She never pushed him to talk about it, but she was always there when he wanted to. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Leo turned to her and said, "I think I did the right thing." She smiled gently. "You did," she said, "and I'm proud of you." At the prison, Kyle's life had settled into a slow rhythm. Time moved differently behind bars. Days were long, nights even longer. He had learned to keep his head down, to stay out of trouble, and to accept that the world outside had moved on without him. He rarely received letters anymore. His daughter had stopped writing. His ex-wife had remarried. The only people who remembered his name were the guards and the other inmates. But inside, he still thought about Henry. Not just about the fall, but about the man himself. His calm voice, his quiet strength, the way he had tried to reason with Kyle instead of fighting back. Sometimes Kyle imagined what might have happened if he had walked away that night instead of pushing. If he had taken a deep breath, let go of his anger, and walked home empty-handed. He thought about all the lives he had changed. Henry's family, who had lost someone they loved. Leo, who had seen something no child should ever see. And himself, the man he used to be, the dreams he once had, now buried beneath regret. One morning, years after his sentencing, Kyle stood in line for breakfast like every other day. The food was bland, the room noisy with murmurs and clinking trays. A guard called his name, and he stepped forward, expecting nothing more than another plate of cold eggs. But instead, the guard handed him a letter. Kyle frowned and took it, fingers trembling slightly. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting looked familiar. He opened it carefully, unfolded the paper, and read. It was from Leo. The letter was short, but the words hit Kyle harder than anything he had read in years. "I don't hate you," Leo wrote. "I used to be scared of what I saw, but now I understand that people make mistakes. I hope you're trying to be better." Kyle read it again, then a third time. He didn't cry, but something inside him shifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone still saw him, not just as a murderer, but as a person who had made a terrible choice. That night, Kyle sat alone in his cell, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the boy who had watched everything unfold in silence. He thought about the man he had killed. He thought about the life he had thrown away. And for the first time in years, he picked up a pen and started writing. He wrote a letter to Leo. He thanked him for speaking the truth. He apologized for making him witness something so dark. He admitted that he had been wrong, that he had let his pain lead him to do something unforgivable. He didn't ask for forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. But he wanted Leo to know that he had changed, that he was trying to be better even if it was too late to undo the past. Months later, Leo received the letter. He read it slowly, sitting at his desk in his bedroom. His mother asked if he wanted to talk about it, but he shook his head. He didn't need to. He understood something now that he hadn't before. He had seen the worst in a man, but he had also seen the beginning of change. Henry's mansion was finally sold. A new family moved in, unaware of the tragedy that had taken place nearby. They painted the walls, planted flowers in the garden, and filled the halls with laughter. The past remained, but it no longer haunted the house. As for the town, life continued. The bridge still stood, worn by time but strong. People crossed it every day, unaware of the story hidden beneath their feet. Children played near the woods, chasing fireflies just like Leo once had. The sea whispered secrets to the rocks, and the wind danced through the trees carrying memories that only some still remembered. Kyle remained in prison, serving out his sentence. But he spent his days differently now. He read books, helped younger inmates learn to write, and volunteered in the prison library. He knew he could never fix what he had done, but he could try to make something good out of what was left of his life. Leo graduated high school, got accepted into a university, and began studying journalism. He wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that gave people a voice when they felt unheard. He never forgot the lesson he had learned as a child, that sometimes the smallest among us can bring the biggest truths into the light. And somewhere, deep inside a prison cell, Kyle read Leo's latest letter with quiet hope. "Thank you for trying to change," it said. And for the first time in a long time, Kyle believed that maybe, just maybe, he could.